virtually due to the COVID emergency that Governor Walz declared. If you'd like to participate in the meeting, public like to participate in the meeting, they can do so by sending us an email. That's an email address on the agenda, and we will respond as quickly as we can. So with that, can we just check to see if we have quorum and call the roll, please?
Barber.
Here.
Gonzalez. Johnson. Lee.
Here.
Lilligren.
Here.
Muse. Ferguson.
Here.
Thank you.
Are there any changes that anybody would like to see to the agenda that we have posted? Okay, all right. Seeing none, can we get a motion to approve the minutes for our meeting on June 9th?
Lilligren moves.
Second
by
him.
Lee.
Go ahead.
Moved by Lilligren, seconded by Lee. Are there any changes or discussions to the minutes? All right, hearing none, can we call the roll, please?
Barber.
Aye.
Johnson. Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Muse. Ferguson.
Aye,
Thank you.
thank you. So is Councilmember Barber, or sorry, Johnson on the phone or on the call yet?
No, Mr. Chair, I do not see her.
Okay. Maybe just for ease, maybe Councilmember Barber, could you lead us through the first part of the agenda?
Certainly, no problem. So today we have no business items, but we have 3 information items. The first information item is annual risk management claims liability statistics, and we have Phil Walljasper here to present, I believe. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'm happy to provide this update on risk management, and as I have done in the past, I will primarily focus on claim statistics, but I will also talk a little bit about the insurance marketplace and what we're seeing with some of the trends in that arena. And then we'll talk about how that impacts our insurance premiums. And then I'll finish up with some high-level discussion about what we want to focus on going forward from a risk standpoint. So let's jump into the claims. If we could go to the next slide, please. One of the most prevalent functions that we provide in the risk department would be the administration of our claims. We self-insure, the council self-insures quite a few of its risks. The 2 primary ones are work comp and liability. And we self-insure those claims, self-administer those with 7 claim reps in the department. But it's more than just the self-insured claims. We also administer claims that are typically handled by an insurance company. And that's by design. So when we go out and procure an insurance policy, one of the things we want to do in that is, to whatever extent we can, leverage the experience that we have within the risk department with our claim staff, because it's a really good story to tell. Great experience. They understand the statutes. They understand the immunities that we have. So we work with the insurance company to have us administer those claims on their behalf, which is not the most common way to do it, but we've had a lot of success with that. So the staff of claim reps also handles quite a few claims that are otherwise handled by an insurance company. So that gives you an idea of the types of claims that we administer within risk. If we could go to the next slide, Greg. Thank you. This would be, what this shows is the number of new claims that we've seen on a yearly basis. And this is our self-insured claims. And it says claims and incidents, and let me provide a little better context for the distinction between claims and incidents. Whenever someone makes a claim or wants some type of compensation against the council, and I say compensation because it could be medical expense reimbursed, it could be wage loss, it could be property damage paid for, it could be I was running after a bus and I tripped and fell because the bus pulled away too soon, and I wrecked my bag of groceries. And that's a true claim that's been presented to us, and they want reimbursement for the groceries. Anytime something like that occurs in our operations, we set up a claim in our system, and regardless of the circumstances, we set it up in our system. On the other hand, an incident would be if something occurs throughout our operations or on our premises that may give rise to a claim. An example would be somebody slipped and fell. They said they were fine and they got up and walked away. We set that up as an incident. We preserve the information in our system so that in the event a claim is made against us, we can investigate it and handle it appropriately. So you can see on a yearly basis, how this trend's broken out by bus liability. So basically any claim that occurs because of our bus operations. And that's broken out simply because that's the highest volume that we have. We also have rail and general liability. That's the rail and GL. And that would be claims that occur because of our light rail or our North Star commuter rail, but would also include property damage. And I'll get to that in a minute. And then workers' compensation claims. And you can see we've had a reduction in 2020, which is probably not a surprise to anyone because of the reduction in the operations and the service that we've provided. If you look at that top bus liability, that's down roughly 35, 36% because of the reduction in the service that we've seen. The middle line on the chart, the gray line, shows the work comp new claims. And that's been down as well because of the reduction in our operations. The rail and general liability is flat. And that was driven because last summer, early summer, late spring, we had quite a bit of vandalism to our rail fleet. We had a lot of windows broken out, dozens of windows broken out that had an impact on that. So not a huge dollar amount, but nonetheless, there are new claims coming in. So again, that just gives you an idea of the number of new claims on a yearly basis. So those are claims reported in each respective year. So if we go to the next slide, Greg. Thank you. This shows claim expense, and this is really the cash flow. And this is something that I've put before the committee previous presentations, but I've broken this out into two categories: work comp claim expense and the casualty claim expense. And the casualty claim expense is really all of the liability and property claim, all the injury claims that we have. If somebody gets injured because of our operations, if we have a situation, somebody slipped and fell, we caused some property damage, that is captured in this casualty claim expense. And you can see, I'll start with the work comp. We did have a reduction on the claim expense from the work comp side. And that was driven primarily because of the reduction in claims. What you may have noticed is that we have a pretty significant increase on the casualty claim expense, which you might not expect because of the reduction in the service and the number of claims that we've seen. But it's important to note that what this chart represents is the cash flow in any given year, regardless of when the claim occurred. So in other words, we could be paying out claims in 2020 or paying out expenses in 2020 for claims that occurred in 4 or 5 years ago. And what we saw with the casualty side is that there was a very large auto claim that we saw. There was also a couple large LRT claims that we saw that occurred that occurred back in 2018 and 2017, that just now in 2020 is when we get to the point where we're settling those out. So that's why you see the spike in 2020 compared to 2019. So moving on to the next slide, we will talk a little bit about the insurance market and what we're seeing with that. So what the council's insurance program has really grown over the last several years. We are now at a point where we are purchasing, in addition to our self-insurance that we talked about, we are purchasing 13 different insurance programs. And I call them programs because, as this committee knows, with our rail liability insurance tower, there are several insurance companies within that program. So we have 13 separate ones that we have. And we do that in a rather coordinated way with our self-insurance, because that second bullet point touches on statutory provisions with immunities and liability limits. And what we want to make sure is that we have the risk that we are incurring, we have funding for those risks. So it could be Within our self-insurance program, we would rely on our tort cap and some of the statutory provisions and immunities that we have. But we may have other risks that we might not be afforded those statutory provisions, or we might be contractually required to go above those statutory provisions, which would require us to coordinate that with an insurance program. So that's grown over the years. And just to give you an idea of some of the new policies that we now have an aviation policy because we have a drone. So that's a risk that we did not have previously, when looking back 5-6 years. So that's something that's new. We have expanded our cyber insurance program because that is becoming more of a challenge, which I'll talk about in a moment. We also have some programs that on the construction side and our contracting side, what we have put into place are programs that would help to remove barriers for potential bidders in construction contracts. We provide a policy that others can participate in. And we realize that some of these policies are somewhat unique and not everyone could go out and get them. Not everyone has the leverage with the insurance markets the way the council does. So it made sense for us to get this master program is what it's called. And we can then charge a much lesser fee to some of the potential bidders, broadening the potential pool of bidders that could participate in our procurement. So it's been a really good program. We have that with our builder's risk. We have that with some specific rail insurance, which has really been helpful and beneficial over the past several years that we've implemented those. The third bullet point, industry trends. I talked about this last year in this presentation. I talked about it with the rail liability before this committee last month. I'll talk about it again next month with our property insurance, but it has been a very, very challenging insurance market. Insurance rates are going up. Insurance carriers are getting out of the market altogether, or they're reducing the amount of insurance that they're willing to put out on a particular risk. So that's been a challenge that is continuing into 2021. Prior to this, we were looking at probably 10 to 12 years of a market condition where we saw rate decreases, or at least no increases, maybe they were flat from year to year. And suddenly we're talking about 50% increases, 60% increases. Some, marketplaces have 100% increases, and some just can't get the insurance altogether. So that continues to be a challenge for us. And I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to address that as we look forward to some of the future initiatives. But again, the last bullet point, some of the challenges are property. Next month, I'll be coming before the committee to talk about our property insurance and that renewal. It's an August 1 renewal. The significance with this year is that this will be the first year that we will not be afforded the first time in 3 years where we won't have the rate guarantee. You may recall that when we first switched 3 years ago or 4 years ago now to AXA, we were able to lock in with a rate guarantee. Well, this is the first year we don't have that. So we are right now beginning to enter into these negotiations to see what the marketplace may hold. Now, I will say the one thing that we have in our favor, and I've talked about this on the rail liability renewal, is that we have a very, very good story to tell. We are very involved with the risk mitigation. Our operations is very involved with making sure that what the recommendations from our insurance company engineers, whether it be flood protection or fire protection, that we take those into account. We put those into our plans for new construction. We did that with the Minneapolis bus garage. We do it with flood, with environmental services, the Metro plant. I mentioned this before, but the Metro plant, we continue to get a full credit for that flood protection. It's in a flood zone, and the reason we get the full credit is because the work that we put forward trying to make sure that we protect that property as much as we can. And what I mean by a full credit is that that property is rated as if it's not in a flood zone. And I'll get into more details next month on that. But if we did not have that credit, that premium alone in that location would increase by approximately $1 million every year. So it's a great effort. It's a great story to tell. We get out in front of the underwriters as much as we can so that we can share that story, and that is reflected in some of the good renewals that we've had. Cybersecurity, if you just read the headlines, that continues to be a big, big challenge industry-wide, and it's no different with us. So there's been a lot of work. Craig Bance has done a really good job of stepping in and recognizing some of this and putting in place some initiatives to address that, and we continue to move forward with that. Workers' compensation, even though there was a dip in that claim expense in 2020, I can tell you that we are facing some pretty big challenges with that and how that's going in 2021. So a lot of different departments are involved with that management and trying to mitigate those claim expenses, but we will continue to work on that as well. And that last one, police professional, again, that is just across the country. It's a very difficult market. It's difficult to get the insurance at a reasonable rate. And we continue with those conversations and our policies and procedures. And again, getting those out in front of the underwriters as well to show that we do have a good story to tell. So that we want to make sure people understand that. So Greg, if you could go to the next slide, please. So we talked about claims, we talked about insurance. Here's a benchmark that I've shared before, but it's a common one in the industry, the total cost of risk. And what it does is it captures all of the expenses that are a part of managing risk. And when I say risk, we're really talking about property and casualty risk, even though risk can be defined much broader than that. But we talk about the claim payments that we have with our self-insured claims. We're looking at our insurance premiums, our insurance broker fees, the risk department budget. All of that goes into what we spend to manage the total cost of risk. And again, the risk would be the property and casualty risk. And you take that as a function of revenue. And I say revenues because that is what the industry norm is in this measurement. But when we look at it, it's really the operating budget. So if you go to the next slide, please, Greg, this is a chart that shows how we've been trending with the total cost of risk. And it's a little busy, so I'll walk through this. If you look at the left vertical axis, that's the total cost of risk. So the red bars on this chart represent how we have been trending with all those categories put together, what the total cost would be. You can see 2020 is the highest it's ever been. And a lot of the things that I've talked about with the insurance premiums and the increased liability claim expense, the casualty claim expense, that is driving that continued increase with the total cost of the risk. On the right vertical axis, that's the total cost of risk per $1,000 of revenue or operating expense. And you can see this is intended to kind of normalize this from year to year. So as an organization grows, so too will the cost of risk, arguably. Now, the scale is a little different on the right. I recognize that. Those are just dollar increments. But the total cost of risk is up about 7%, and that total cost of risk per $1,000 of revenue is up about 4%. But it's a good way to kind of see how as we grow, how well we're managing risk and what we're doing to help mitigate some of those expenses. So Greg, if we can go to the next slide, please. Looking ahead. Obviously, one of the biggest things we're facing from a risk standpoint is what we're seeing with the insurance industry. We've got some very large risks that we're going to continue to grow that we're going to need to insure. We're looking at our rail liability growing, our property program is growing. So one of the challenges is how do you get the capacity and get the total insurance that we need, not only from an operational standpoint, but from a contractual standpoint. And how do we do that so it's cost effective? And one of the things that we've been looking at is some alternative risk financing, some risk sharing with other similar entities across the country, and a captive insurance program. And a captive insurance program is really, it's by definition and by statute an insurance program, but it's one where we have ownership in that risk and we have ownership in the captive, where if we have very favorable loss history, which we do, it's a way for us to start recouping some of the premium dollars that we put out year after year after year. So with the operations that we have and the focus that we have on loss prevention and safety, it makes a lot of sense. And the size of our program, it makes a lot of sense to look at some of these options. So we'll continue with those efforts. We've got a consultant working on that now, and I'm hopefully later in this year, I'll come back before the committee with more information about that. Technology, we have finished implementing this past year. We implemented a new system within risk, our risk system that we use to manage some of the claim administration information. Origami is the name of this application. We're looking to really leverage some of that technology to get the information out to the people within the council that need to manage this, because I've always said no one department can effectively manage the cost of risk. So the more information we can get out, the more we can get that in front of people, the more discussion it generates, and the more initiatives we can implement and better manage that total cost. That leads to the partnership. Then internally, like I said, we're going to partner with other departments. We want to make sure that we're looking at this enterprise-wide so that we can help manage that some of the costs. And the insurance companies, I can tell you, I cannot overemphasize the importance of having partnerships with insurance companies, inviting the underwriters to come and write our operations, to see our systems, to make sure they understand what we do, not only from an operational standpoint, but to protect those risks. That leads to great partnerships and great renewals down the road. One of the other changes that took place within risk, not so much with the claim statistics or insurance, but business continuity. So we officially, just right before the pandemic, Kathy Matter and Lisa Belland in the business continuity department became a part of risk, which makes a lot of sense because what they do overlaps what we have with the insurance piece. It overlaps what we do with risk control. And it gets to that more of an enterprise-wide view of risk, where you can look at the insurable risks that I've talked about today, but gets us also looking at enterprise-wide risks that I define as any risk that would keep the business from meeting its business objectives. And it can be any number of things, but to take a look at not only those insurable risks that have that impact, but also enterprise-wide. So it's a great partnership. There's a great synergy there to have business continuity as a part of risk. And we've talked a little bit throughout this presentation about some of the emerging risk. We continue to stay abreast of that to make sure that we find the best way, again, to manage those risks and to have financing available, funding available for the liabilities and the risks that we assume, because we don't want to have unfunded liability. So that's not only from an insurance standpoint, but it's also from a contractual standpoint with our contract negotiations. And we'll continue with those efforts going forward. And I believe, next slide, please, Greg. I believe that is it. And Mr. Chair and committee members, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about this.
Thank you, Phil. Chris has a bunch of background noise. Our Chair Ferguson does. So I'm going to kind of coordinate right now. So are there any questions from council members? Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm sorry, I finally had a chance to grab something to eat, so I apologize. I'm chewing here a little, but thanks, Phil, for the report on the work. And I just wanted to go back to the what you said about, and I'm trying to remember, I'm sorry, I have so many windows open, but you mentioned a comment of some increased cost due to broken windows on trains and maybe even buses, I think you said earlier. And I'm wondering, was that related to the civil unrest? Is that, or was it just sort of an odd spike in that kind of vandalism?
Mr. Chair, committee members, was it related to civil unrest? It was around the same time. I don't know if we did have some vandalism because of some of the civil unrest. Yes, we did. But there were a couple, I think it was over a few day period where we had, I mean, I want to say it was like 60 to 70 windows on our fleet broken. And that really impacted the number of claims. And we did report that, and we were able to get that reported to our insurance carrier, but that impacted the number of claims. So there was some damage related to the civil unrest, but I don't recall if that timing of the LRT fleet window was the same. I just don't recall that. But I do know we had some with a couple of our buses, yes.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Thanks.
All right. Any additional questions or comments? Phil, I had one question. I was just curious. I mean, are you seeing any changes in claims or things relative to the pandemic itself? I know there's been a number that went down, probably especially workman's comp, but are you seeing any other trends related to the pandemic?
Mr. Chair, committee members, specifically related to the pandemic. So for COVID itself, no, we really have not seen any claims that are directly related to that. I would say, though, that we have some claims that came out of indirectly from the pandemic. And it could just be a matter of people being away from work for so long. Some of the other episodes that we've had with civil unrest over this past year, we've had some claims that did have an impact on the work comp side, some of the vandalism claims. But we did talk a lot about that before the pandemic, because I think we probably have all seen the headlines in the news about people that have been in required hospitalizations and ICU for a long time, but we have not seen anything specifically related to that directly.
All right, thank you. And I see Councilmember Gonzalez has a question.
Thank you. And this is just more for my understanding. You mentioned about the captive insurance program. Can you tell us more about what exactly that is and how that works?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, committee members. So we first started to look at a captive because of the issues we were running into last year with the rail liability piece. And a captive it's a legal entity that's formed in any number of states, or is domiciled in any number of locations based on what makes the most sense for the risk that you have. But it's an insurance company by statute, by definition. And it's one where the members basically own that. And you can have multiple people be a part of that. It's kind of like a risk. You can have it set up so it's like a risk sharing. The reason we looked at this back with the rail liability is because one of the advantages of a captive, in addition to some of the savings, and you could recoup some of the costs on the premium dollars, but one of the advantages is that I could go out through a captive and access reinsurance companies that I otherwise would not have access to. So forgive me if I'm getting too much into the weeds here, but reinsurance is insurance for insurance companies. So if I go out and buy insurance and they're providing me $50 million of insurance, they don't put that full 50 million up. They buy insurance themselves, and that's through the reinsurance market. I don't have access to the reinsurance market directly. If I have a captive and I kind of run that captive and I own that captive, then I could access those reinsurance markets directly. I could do the same presentation to those reinsurance underwriters to get them to have the same comfort level that our primary insurance underwriters do, and get the insurance through that way. So that was the first reason we looked at this, was to get direct access to the reinsurance markets, to increase our capacity, just increase the amount of insurance we could get. And then as we started talking about all of our different risks that we insure, all the different accounts and funds that we have through self-insurance, through our health insurance, through our professional liability, our public officials liability, all these different accounts that we have, we realized we've got a pretty big program that we could use as capital to form our own captive to start recouping some of the premiums that we otherwise would pay. So it's really twofold: capacity through reinsurance, but then also trying to recoup some of the premium dollars because of our favorable loss history. So it's really an insurance company that we would be an owner, a part owner of, depending on how we structure this. It would allow us to do what an insurance company does. I hope that answered the question.
Excellent. Yeah, and just quickly follow up, and that captive can cover every type of liability that we have, from workers' comp to whatever other limitations on the type of liability that it can cover.
Mr. Chair, committee members, that's a very good point. It can, but I need to preface this by saying it's an insurance organization, so it needs to be an insurable risk. And what I mean by that, you need to be able to have a way to create a premium for it. And the regulators really watch that closely. So we could put any liability we wanted in there, absolutely, but we would need to capitalize that with a premium that would make sense with the type of risk that we're insuring. The difference is, if we go through the end of the policy period and we don't have losses, that capital's still in there and it can continue to grow. We can expand the risk. We can put that to other things within the captive. And it's just a way to allow us to start realizing some of the benefits that an insurance company would have when they charge a premium but don't pay any losses. We would be able to do that. So in other words, you can't just say, I'm going to insure everything and I'm going to put $1 in there. You know, the regulators would not allow that. It has to be an insurable risk, and you have to have a rateable premium.
Thank you. Are there
Great,
other
thank you.
questions?
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Councilmember Gonzalez. Any other questions from council members? All right. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you
We're
very
on.
much.
Have a good day. We're on to our next information item, which is the FTE DBE program analysis. We have Ashanti Payne here to present.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to share some program analysis that the Office of Equal Opportunity conducted on our Federal Transit Administration DBE program. Next slide, please. So our FTA program is administered by the Small Business Unit in OEO, and this is just kind of an overview of some of the work relative to that program that has been conducted over the first quarter. So there were 56 projects that were reviewed for an inclusion goal, and 42 of those 56 were assigned a numerical goal. There were 45 bid or proposal evaluations completed, and of those, 3 did not meet the numerical goal, but made adequate good faith efforts. And then there were 11 that did not meet the goal, but did not document adequate good faith efforts. Turn up my volume, move closer to my mic. Hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. And then as of April 1st, there have been 1 administrative reconsideration. Since then, that number has gone up to 2. And I know that there is 1 more scheduled. And then the council is part of the Minnesota Unified Certification Program, where we have direct responsibility for the certification of DBE firms. And council staff thus far in Q1 certified 15 new DBE firms. And as a point of reference, there were a total of 53 done in 2020. So we're pretty much on par with our normal participation efforts. Next slide, please. All right, and you can move to the next slide. So this, what we're going to share with you today is the number of DBEs by ethnicity and place of business. Also industry type by ethnicity, and then Minnesota-based DBEs by ethnicity and gender. And then last, our DBE participation on our FTA funded projects. Next slide, please. So just in terms of just some overall information, of course, DBE applies to any project that receives in part or whole federal funds. It includes construction projects, professional and technical and engineering projects. And we are required to do analysis and establish a 3-year goal, which is referred to our triennial goal. And our goal for federal fiscal years 21 through 23 is 14%. And of course, project-specific goals are established by our small business unit and light rail transit unit. And then we report this utilization to the FTA on a semi-annual basis. And the achievement is measured against contracts that were awarded over those federal fiscal year periods, semi-annually. Next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of the number of DBEs in our directory as of May 26th. So as you see, there are 1,190 DBEs, and you can break them down by Metro District, Greater Minnesota, and then because the DBE program is a federal program, we have DBEs that participate in our program or have expressed interest to participate on our projects from states outside of Minnesota. Next slide, please. So here are, that same information broken down by industry type. We kept the industry type at a high level for this presentation. However, your handout has a more detailed breakdown. For an example, construction is broken down, is very general. It includes civil, what we refer to as highway heavy, commercial, residential. So that more detailed information is available in your handout. Next slide, please. And again, just for reference, some more of these work types that are broken down, again, split out by Metro District, Greater Minnesota, and Interstate. Next slide, please. So it's also important for us to understand how that filters down and breaks out both by ethnicity and gender. And you'll see that some of these categories are highlighted in red, and you'll understand a little bit more about why we have done that once we get towards the end of the presentation. But as you see, when you talk about construction, manufacturing, transportation, and warehousing, of course, we have a heavy participation by Caucasian women. However, Black Americans are represented in those categories as well at a significant rate. Next slide, please. And then the other category that we've highlighted is professional technical services and scientific. Those would be your engineering and consultant contractors are grouped into that category. Next slide, please. So this is also our directory broke down by both ethnicity and gender. The one item that stands out for me and should for others is the lack of participation in our directory for businesses owned by women of color. There are just not a lot of them that are certified in our directory. Next slide, please. So some of the key points that I wanted to focus in on are the source of this information is the MenuSweeper directory. The date, cutoff date was May 13th. Of course, the total number of firms. NAICS codes, which is the North American Industry Classification System. It's just a grouping of scopes of work. There are 389 represented in the directory. And then there are 831 DBs that have multiple NAICS codes, with 2 being the lowest, and the highest one firm has 23 NAICS codes. And then there are 359 of those firms that only have 1 NAICS code. Next slide, please. So we did an analysis of really where the DBE participation is coming from on our FTA funded projects, who's getting those dollars, who has received those dollars, and in what scopes of work. Next slide, please. So over, as you can see, 2019, number of contracts and number of contracts awarded to DBEs went down from 2019 to 2020. I know a lot of folks have said that we really don't understand or know for sure what the impacts of COVID were to the industry, and maybe there aren't much right now. However, we just also had a presentation at our Southwest Light Rail Advisory Committee meeting last week from MnDOT, and they are showing the same trend in terms of dollars and contracts going down from 2019 to 2020. The other thing is I point out as a key indicator is the number of prime contracts awarded to DBEs or businesses owned by BIPOC or women, because that's what's going to hit the bottom line with the most impact if they have the ability and capacity to be awarded and compete for prime contracts in our programs and activities. Next slide, please. So as you see, in 2019, our overall DBE goal was 15%. We exceeded the goal at 16%. In 2020, we did not achieve our goal. And when you do not achieve your goal, we are required to conduct a shortfall analysis and also identify our plan of action in terms of correcting that situation moving forward. And again, this highlights the vast drop in dollars from 2019 to 2020. We also know that the Southwest Light Rail project was awarded in 2019. That does account for and represent a good portion of those dollars from 2019. Next slide, please. So here's the breakdown of awarded contracts over those 2 years, broken down by ethnicity. And as you can see, the majority of awarded contracts by number went to Caucasian women, followed by Hispanic Americans and Black Americans in terms of number of contracts. Next slide, please. And then again, broken down by both ethnicity and women. Again, this just highlights the lack of participation in our programs by businesses owned by women of color. And it's consistent with how they're represented in our directory. Next slide, please. So one of the things that really stands out to me on this next slide in terms of dollars, even though Black Americans were awarded in number of contracts, third in terms of on that list, they are not third in terms of dollars. And I would attribute that to a number of things, primarily being capacity. The size of the contracts that are being awarded to Black-owned firms. So that's definitely an area of focus and definitely something we need to understand in terms of what are those scopes of work that are being awarded and what does that breakdown look like for us, which is why I highlighted those scopes of work in red in some of the previous slides. Next slide, please. So again, distribution in dollars by gender and ethnicity. Same trends. Next slide, please. So we did some analysis in terms of what were the top 10 scopes of work that were utilized to meet subcontracting goals on FTA funded projects. So, of course, what really stands out and was consistent over both years was electrical services, both in terms of number of contracts and the high dollar value. And then, of course, trucking, the high dollar value. But I think 2019, again, a lot of that can be attributed to the Southwest Light Rail project being awarded in 2019. But it is a main area for us. And then also mechanical services is one of the consistent scopes that is utilized to meet goals on our projects. Next slide, please. So who are the top 10 DB firms that were utilized, both in number of contracts and dollar value on our projects to meet goals. And if you look on here, yes, out of the top 10, 5 are owned by Caucasian women for 2019. In 2020, that dropped down to 4. But in both years, there was only one Black-owned firm that is part of that top 10 list. And then also, you can see that although the number of contracts is 4, also a low dollar value. Next slide, please. So what do we look like so far for the first half of 2021? So our first half report was due to FTA June of this year. And our goal, again, is 14% for 2021 through 23. And we are exceeding that thus far at 21%, which is definitely a good thing. Again, one of the things I look at, though, only one prime contract awarded to DBEs over the first half, which again has to be a focus for us to impact the overall bottom line. Next slide, please. So what were the contract types? So construction mainly, and then professional services. There were no master contracts awarded over the first half of 2021, and no grants or contract awards to subrecipients over the first half of 2021. We definitely expect that to change, or it will change once we do our year-end and second half report. Next slide, please. So what were some of the big contributors to that first half participation and achievement rate? The D-line system-wide construction contract, which was 20 million, which represents 81% of the awards. And it had a 16.88% DBE commitment. And then hoist replacements, which represented 5.5% of the total DBE participation, which had that project had a commitment rate of 16.8% as well. Next slide, please. So this is how it broke down by gender and ethnicity. And again, the things that stand out, which was alarming to us, is that 0 contracts and dollars awarded to Black Americans over the first half. The reason why that is alarming to us, one, is because over the same period, we saw an uptick in awarded dollars and contracts to Black American-owned firms on our locally funded projects. And then also, we do have representation of those firms within our directory. So it is really alarming, and that's really what triggered us to really dig deeper and do some analysis in terms of who do we have certified, what are we using, how are we fulfilling our goals or meeting our goals on projects. Although I will say it is a more equitable distribution this time around relative to businesses owned by people of color and women. Historically here at the council and our partner agencies here in the state and then across the nation, that's usually about an 80% to Caucasian-owned firms versus BIPOC. Next slide, please. So one of the things in terms of what we, want to utilize this analysis for, and what our strategies will be moving forward, and what that support and help we will be seeking and asking from the council and council members, is one, in terms of our outreach and our engagement. In your handout, you have both a detailed list of the scopes of work broken down, So through your connections with your constituencies, we ask that if you know of businesses, if you know of business advocacy groups or connections that you have that can help us in terms of our outreach and engagement and understanding where we need more participation, we ask for your help in that regard. And then you also, we collaborated with the Department of Procurement to understand in terms of a purchasing of goods and our warehouse purchasing, where they would like to see more MCUB and DBE businesses. And we have provided a list of those that they've identified where we need. So again, through your networks and constituencies, we ask for your help to help us in those outreach and engagement efforts to address those gaps where we have. And then also supporting legislative initiatives that we feel that could help us in forward equity and also reducing disparities in our region. Though that's going to be key for us as well. We also need to utilize our current statutory authority and current council policies that allow us to act intentionally with MCUB and DB firms. Also, mentor protege. We have found, and we will be, and actually just completed this same analysis for our EPA funded projects for environmental services. And we've had some really good success through mentor protege. We have a Black-owned firm that just a little over a year ago had no work or no experience on council projects, and a little over a year has been awarded $2 million in work on council projects. So mentor protege has been an effective tool, and we will be looking to expand on that program. And then we also appreciate the support for the new unit within OEO, the Engagement and Development Unit. This analysis was led by the new hire, the first hire in that unit, with support from our SBU staff. Thomas Mabratu prepared this, and this is going to really help us and set the groundwork in terms of where we need to focus some of our resources, some of the dollars, and some of our activities to really hone in not just on compliance and regulation, but really to achieve equity. And equity cannot be achieved just through compliance and regulation. And then also, we are going to be, we haven't surveyed our small businesses, BIPOC and women-owned businesses in quite some time. And we are preparing to survey our businesses to really understand what those barriers are, where the needs are from a technical standpoint, and also from a resources standpoint. And with that, Mr. Chair, council members, I would take any questions that you have.
All right. Thank you, Ashanti. Questions from council members? Comments? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Councilmember Barber. This is really great. And Ashanti, I know that you work with SCI and the EAC. Does the EAC get to take a look at this information, because they talk about it a lot, which you probably know, but this is really, really good, and I'm sure they would appreciate it. Is that something that you coordinate with them, or do they have to make a formal request, or how can that be accomplished?
Yes, we definitely make suggestions to the EAC agenda. They do have the ultimate control and decision. However, I think the EAC shared some of this information with council. they have changed their structure a little bit, and they have some subcommittees. And this is information that we would share with the operations subcommittee and let them decide if they want to share it and have this be a presentation to the full EAC. Yes, would love to share this with the EAC because we definitely need their support and help as well to have impact.
Thank you. And I am on the EAC now, and I know that Councilmember Gonzalez, who's a co-chair, is on the management committee as well. And so whatever we can do to get it to that subcommittee would be great. And I'm sure they would really love to share it with the whole group. So thanks, Ashanti. I'll look forward to seeing it on the other side on the EAC committee.
Thank you.
Chair Ferguson, did you have something?
You know, I did, and
I'm sorry for the background noise, but I just wanted to, there was a question that came up from the community as we think about how do we make sure that we are inclusive of people that could do work for our projects. And there was, I guess, a piece of work that I'd like to have Ashanti, you and your team think about, which is as we are developing these scopes and setting our numbers for each one of the projects, if we could publish that worksheet prior to finalizing the numbers. And so that way we could allow the DBs in the community and the MCUB vendors to look at the work that's coming up. And if we've missed people that could be available to do some of that work, because, you know, I know for a number of people that registered, they're highlighting certain work, but there's lots of other work they may be able to do. That way, then we could get a true picture of who's available to do work on the contracts we're looking to do, and we can set a goal that is really representative. And then, you know, by highlighting who's put their hand up and said they're available to do that work, it might make it easier for the primes who are winning and bidding on the contract to be able to identify people that they should be talking to about potentially being sub to those contracts. And so I just wanted to see if you guys could work and think about how we might be able to make that available publicly so that people could look at it and make sure that we've included all of the DBs that could potentially be doing work.
Thank you, Chair Ferguson. Council members, we will work and sit down with our partners, primarily procurement, and find out ways that we can effectively do that, and definitely probably reach back to you and council members to get any additional information that'll help us meet that challenge.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Any additional questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, thanks. And Ashanti, thanks for the report and for all your work on this. And I have a question about the first half of fiscal year 2021 DB report. And do we use the calendar year as our fiscal year? And it just seems like this is really helpful, almost like real-time data, if so. And so I'm just wondering if I don't remember seeing something quite this fresh before, and so I'm just wondering if it's from the first half of calendar year 2021 or if our fiscal year started last year.
Councilmember Lilligren, Chair, council members. The DBE, our semi-annual report in our first half is based on the federal fiscal year. So
Okay.
The federal fiscal year starts October 1st and ends September 30th. So the first half information covers through March, but is due to FTA in June. And then the year-end report is due December.
Okay.
And that's how we report.
Yeah, thanks. Very helpful. Thank you.
Councilmember Ferguson, or Chair Ferguson.
Just one other question. I know President Biden has indicated a desire to increase the
amount of DB utilization, in particular targeting BIPOC businesses. How do you think that'll affect our work, and what are we seeing coming from the federal government in that regard?
Chair Ferguson, council members, I think it has the potential to impact our work and definitely our impact with BIPOC owned businesses in our programs and activities. I think there's also some information put out by President Biden in the Department of Transportation. They're asking for feedback in terms of, you know, what would move the needle, what would help in eliminating some of these disparities. And we've also asked our EAC members to comment and provide comment in terms of their perspective in getting this information out to their constituencies. So I think it goes back to some of those things I mentioned as well. There are ways to utilize current statute and policies effectively. And then also there are a lot of statutory authority that is not even specific to MCUB or DBE, but can be used intentionally to impact those businesses. So again, I look forward to what comes out of this solicitation for and request for information and responses through the Department of Transportation and President Biden, but also incorporating that feedback that we get from the businesses themselves, and that will shape kind of how we can direct some of our resources, activities, and most importantly, our outreach.
All right, any additional questions or comments? I had one that kind of ties into what Chris was asking about the federal programs and how commenting. I think one of the key weaknesses that you can see really in your data is for women-owned people of color businesses. That seems to be something that really is something that needs to be addressed and seems like a place that we should definitely focus some energy on. So, you know, I don't know what that looks like or how that comment or information gets fed up, but I mean, that would be just one of my observations.
Thank you, Councilmember Barber. Yes, definitely something that stood out to us as a point of focus and emphasis.
Yeah, great. All right, I'll give it one last call. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, thank you, Ashanti. That was very interesting and very informative. Appreciate it very much. Next, we are on to our final information item. It's the 2022 General Purposes Levy Strategy and Preliminary RA Budget Allocations. We have Marie Henderson here to present, and I can't believe we're doing this already. It feels like we just did this.
This is preliminary, so let's hang on. But good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. I am Marie Henderson, acting CFO, and today we'll be talking about the levy strategy and the preliminary regional administration budget allocations. So we'll go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about the budget schedule, since here we are again. We do have two statutory deadlines highlighted in red in our budget development timeline. The levy adoption on October 25th will be the upper limit. After September 1st, the council may lower but not raise the total levy amount. Our metro area counties will consider our levy amounts in establishing their own budgets and tax levies, and will mail out the truth in taxation notices to property owners showing the proposed amount of property taxes from all taxing jurisdictions. And then the final budget and levy adoption date at the council will be on December 8th. Of course, the budget must be adopted by December 20th by statutory commitments. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We refer to our proposed operating budget as the regional administrator's recommended budget as required by statute and will be submitted by the council for approval. Ultimately, as we go through public comment and final adoption, this does become the council's budget. So next slide. First, I would like to talk a little bit about our levy strategy. Our levy strategy has some givens. And the first is we do need to meet our debt service needs for parks and transit. Second, we receive $5 million annually from the fiscal disparity on the tax base revitalization account, and this account is dedicated for the cleanup of polluted land. The council has the following for strategy base for setting the levy. First, we maximize the general purpose levy, as this is our most flexible spending dollars. Also, we hold the total levy increase to a 2% annually. However, last year, we remembered we did not increase our levy due to the pandemic, and we are proposing to go back to that total levy at 2% increase. Although through our livable communities and general purpose levies have limited growth in statute, we can only increase it by the implicit price deflator. I'll talk a little bit about that, what that amount is. And we have chosen to maximize that levy along with the general purpose levy, again, being the most flexible dollars. And for the local housing incentive account, receive statutory transfer from the Livable Community Demonstration Account, or the LCDA, to fund grants to municipalities to help meet their affordable and life cycle housing goals. We also could levy for highway right-of-way program. However, there are sufficient reserves in that fund, and there is not a need to levy at this point. So if we can go to the next slide. I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper this year into each of the levies and what they are about. So the first is that we have that given that we meet transit and park debit service needs. We do have a statute. So per statute 473.39 for transit, that the debt service levies are not limited by the implicit price deflator inflation rate, but for transit and for parks, they're effectively limited by statute authority granted to us to issue debt. Our current authority is that and this is from 2020, of course, legislation hasn't settled yet, but right now we cannot exceed 92.3 million for capital expenditures. To date, the current pressures on transit debt has been handled within the 2% because of the time that it takes to commit the funds for capital programs, and when you need to issue bonds and to get the cash to pay the vendor, and when you need to levy to repay those bonds. And also what's happened is that we haven't had pressures from the other levies. So for example, the highway right-of-way or parks in the past have not applied pressure, and we've been able to stay within the 2%. And again, for 2022, we can continue to stay within that 2% increase without affecting the transit levy. For the purpose and demonstration of the impact, though, if this levy was the priority, we don't let outstanding debt grow. This particular, the debt service of transit, would eat up at all the other levies. So next slide. This is our parks levy. And parks, like transit debt, is limited by statutory authority granting us to issue debt. The current authority that we have is that we cannot exceed $40 million. If we track back to 2003, we've averaged issuing for parks about 4.6 million, which is represented by the green bars on this graph. The levying ranges average about 5.7, which is the blue line. And our outstanding debt currently for parks is 14.8 million. We issued 8.8 million in 2020 and $6 million earlier this year in 2021. So we do have an anticipatory levy on parks for the 2022 levy at $6 million. Parks is currently, like everything else, kind of in statute, but also legislation is looking at current strategies. There's hopeful that there will be some mitigation on some of the park future reimbursement programs, but not all of the parks risk will be taken care of, and we anticipate having a levy in future years. So next slide. Talk a little bit about livable communities. The tax base revitalization fiscal disparity. That's the $5 million that we receive from the fiscal disparity program. This program is a tax-based sharing program within the metropolitan area and is funded by commercial and industrial properties owners, not homeowners. The Livable Community Demonstration Account has been growing by that general implicit price deflator. In 2022, the levy is proposed at $3 million. By maximizing this levy, this strategy is to create a transit-oriented development component within the Livable Community Demonstration Account grant program. The current goal is to reach a levy amount of $13.2 million. This is annually to fund $7.7 million in the demonstration account program, $5 million for that transit-oriented program, and $500,000 required by statute for a local housing initiative account. At the 2% increase, this goal would be reached with the 2023 levy. And the next slide. We talk about the general purpose levy being our most flexible dollars. These are our non-debt service levy increases each year in accordance to the measurement of the government inflated rate. This is called the implicit price deflator, and over the past years, this has been averaging around 2%, although in other years we've seen less than 1% growth. This year, the rate just came out this week, and the rate is 2.73. This allows us to maximize the general purpose levy and the livable community demonstration account. The primary use of the general purpose levy is for community development administration and the local housing initiatives. This will leave us with around $3 million for one-time targeted initiatives this year. Just finished the 2021 targeted initiatives. And of course, targeted initiatives are for those one-time uses for pilot or to bridge to other funding sources, and the strategy around advancing equity within the region for housing, security, transportation, climate stability, and housing affordability. So we have that opportunity to talk about setting up one-time funding sources again. We'll go to the next slide. So this graph shows the comparison of the increases in total regional levies by government type since 2007. And of course, that includes cities and counties and school districts. We are represented on that yellow line. And although I understand that this is not a true apples to apples comparison, you can see that the council's levy is much slower rate than the regional other government types. So let's go to the next slide and look at all of our strategies and what does that mean in putting dollar amounts together with it. So when we go to the non-debt service levies, again, using the implicit price deflator and maximizing the general purpose levy and the livable communities demonstration account, we do not have to levy, like I said, for the highway right-of-way. There's plenty reserved there. And the tax base revitalization for the $5 million does not come from taxpayer dollars, but is money that we received. We would have total non-debt levies proposed for 2022 at 34.6 million, which is 88.6% of the allowable amount within our levy limits. Then, like I said, the debt service part of that with transit and parks, it's not limited by levy, but by statute. We would fill in the parks levy for the 6 million for anticipatory. And for transit, we have payments for our past bonding issuance around 33 million, and the balance would be about a $19 million anticipatory levy for transit. Again, looking at this creates the overall total levy at 2%. So before I go on to the regional administration allocation, a different topic, just want to pause here and see if there's any questions about the proposal of the overall 2% on the levy.
Any questions or comments? I am not seeing any hands raised or anything, Marie.
All right, great, thank you. Then we'll go on to
Councilmember Barber, could I
Oh.
just ask one quick question?
Of course, Councilmember Johnson.
It's a minor one, but I've always you know, had to deal with the implicit price deflator over the years when setting levies, and especially when levy limits are on for cities. What's driving that number to be higher this year? Is it, you know, just the market? Because I know it's a pretty strict formula. Do you know?
It is a strict formula that, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair and committee members, it is a formula that we receive from MMB. I am not 100% sure all of the factors that go in there. It is pretty comparable to last year, though.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Anything additional, council members? All right, go ahead, Marie.
All right, perfect. Then we'll go on to the next slide, and we will talk about the regional administration budget allocation. And go ahead and flip one more slide. So this year, the proposal for the regional administration budget for 2022 is $86.4 million. And this is about a 15.6% increase from 2021, where it was 74.7 million. In the next slides, I will be explaining this increase. But first, I want to explain that regional administration can be divided into 4 functional categories. As created by the chart, it includes regional administrative services, which includes the management of the overall council decision-making process, the internal review of council programs and finances, legal representation and relationships with other government agencies, and the legislator. So this includes the chair's office, governor affairs, government council, program evaluation, audit, and OEO. We could just flip back a slide. We can also look at the business services, including communications and community relationships and recruitment. So this is communications department and human resources. Financial services includes budgeting, accounting, financial reporting, procurement, and management of the council risks. So it's finance, budget, contracts and procurement, real estate, and risk. And informational services is the last group, the one in the big red at 58%, providing computer services and geographic information services to our council programs. For 2022, IS also includes the Enterprise Content Management Group. You'll see by use of category that more than 55% of our budget in RA is salaries. The contracted services and IT maintenance, which includes hardware and software maintenance, is 33%, just the 2 purple pie charts, and then the other is mainly utilities, materials, and supplies. So we'll flip to the next page. And so when we talk about the 15% increase or the $11.7 million, I want to point out a couple things. And it looks very shocking. So I just want to explain that the salaries is actually 2 years increasing. When we completed the 2021 budget, we had a 0% increase for salaries, and you will see a budget amendment coming through in August to amend that. And then you'll see the increase then from 2021 to 2022. Of that, the 3.4 million, about $1 million of it is from the increase from year to year, so the 2 years, so $2 million, and then another $1 million that are driving some new positions that we will talk about. And let's just go to the next slide to break down a little bit more about that $11.7 million and how it is a true number, but it's not a true impact. So like we just talked about was the salaries of that 3.4 million. For the BPSI project, that's the Business Process and System Integration Program. This is 3.8 million. This is for year 2 of this initial investment in this long-term project. It's operating expenses. A lot of it is blueprinting or fact finding of projects that we need to be working on. And also some of this may become capital, it may become operating. It depends on what systems are picked, whether it's cloud service or if we're using our services. But this is just for the 2 years for the investment for that long-term project. The third one, increasing for hardware and software, that 1.5 million. This is twofold. A lot of that is the tails of uh, the maintenance of our hardware and software, as those prices tend to go up higher than inflation. The other thing is that we are moving a lot to more cloud-based services, more than the physical assets for the support. And because of that, for accounting, it becomes more operational than capital expense. And this also includes additional transit lines and the need to invest in information technology security. So the other expenses, the 0.4 million, is contracted services within HR and for various contracts for assessments and some temporary help. That also includes some contracted services within the IT division. We also have $2.6 million. Now this is transferring into into IS, but the divisions also have it out of their budget. So if we were to look at the overall budget, which we will take a look at closer to August, you would see that decrease from their budgets in the divisions, but an increase in IS. So it does look like IS is increasing. However, the overall budget for this 2.6 will be going down. And so we'll just go to the next slide. And what does that mean for each of the operating divisions when we allocate out these RA costs? And it's reflective of the services provided to the divisions. We do want to say that there was a change in methodology for some of the RA departments this year. For example, audit, communications, general counsel, OEO, and risk were moved to a more stable basis, primarily by their headcount instead of the headcount that was just utilizing for the other divisions. This has generally reduced allocations within ES and CD, but added some allocations to transit. It should, though, reduce the fluctuations from year to year. And secondly, the increased cost in RA is primarily to what we just talked about, really the salaries and the BPSI. They hit the divisions differently. The transit group is going up on their capital budget. It will also reduce, and they will be absorbing a bigger part of the BPSI program because they have a large share of the council's assets. ES similarly is also going up to IS changes, but again, mostly because of that BPSI. And just to put a little bit in perspective of what share each division had this year compared to last year, CD and HRA was at 4%, ES was at 25%, now they're at 25.1%, MTS last year was at 8%, and Metro Transit was at 62%. And I have one last slide to talk about the headcount ask within the proposal of the budget, being that $1 million that I talked about earlier. The proposal adds 10 FTEs to the budget. One is for audit, which will return them to their 2016 complement of 10 FTEs. 2 headcount within HR, one where HR business partner that will support all council business units in classification, candidate assessments, and management consultation. And it's also, the second one would be a reallocation of equity training position from OEO to HR. The 7 that you see in IS, 3 of them were actually already approved through the February budget amendment. The other ones include 2 people for the service desk that will help reduce overtime and staff burnout, and 2 for information security. And with that, that is the RA allocation proposal. If there's any questions?
Are there any questions or comments from council members? All right. I'm not seeing any. Chair Ferguson, do you have any comments?
No, not at this time. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. All right, anyone else? All right, I'm not seeing anything else, Marie, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's the last item on the agenda. So if there are no objections, we can be adjourned and we'll see you at 4. Bye, everyone.